In December of 1933, as Chicago was breathing its first legal ice-cold gulp of beer, a demolition crew was tasked with tearing down the old Bellucci mansion in Little Sicily. The family had vanished almost a year prior, swallowed by the gangland wars. The crew was told to level the estate, to erase the stain of its former owner. They started in the cellar. It was a vast, cold space that still held the phantom smell of old wine and cured meat. But in the far wall, behind a false partition of newer brick, they found something that wasn't on any blueprint. It was a solid block of concrete, roughly 10 feet wide and 6 feet deep. It was when the foreman brought his sledgehammer against it that the work stopped. Embedded within the rough grey cement, like grotesque statues in a hellish museum, were 3 figures. One was a large man, his arms outstretched as if in rage. One was a younger man, his form twisted, huddled in on himself. And the third was a slighter figure, almost calm, his hands clasped as if in prayer. The Bellucci family hadn't just vanished. They had been made into a monument. This discovery was the final horrifying punctuation mark on a story that had terrified the Chicago underworld. It was the story of the Bellucci bloodline, a family so powerful, so feared, and so fundamentally broken that the only end they could find was to be buried in their own foundation. What really happened in that house? What dark force, what ancient grudge, or what internal rot led to the most cursed family in American crime sealing their own tomb? To understand how it came to this, how a dynasty built on iron and blood dissolved into concrete and whispers, we must go back 1 year to the bitter winter of 1932, when the family's patriarch, Don Corrado Bellucci, first realized his legacy was rotting from the inside out. Don Corrado Bellucci was not a man. He was a monument of old-world dread. He was known as the Crow, a name earned not for any particular cunning, but for his habit of dressing in immaculate black suits and for the way he would personally oversee the cleansing of traitors, perched on a chair in the corner of a warehouse, watching with an unsettling avian stillness. His empire was built on the unholy trinity of prohibition: bootlegged whiskey, gambling dens that stank of stale sweat and desperation, and a protection racket so pervasive it was like a second shadow government. The Bellucci mansion was his nest. It was a cold cathedral of Italian marble and dark mahogany, a house where the carpets were so thick they swallowed the sound of footsteps, making every approach feel like a phantom's arrival. Silence was Corrado's preferred currency. He believed noise was a sign of weakness, of inefficiency. His capos and soldiers spoke in hushed tones, their eyes constantly darting to the shadows, terrified that a raised voice would draw the Crow's attention. But for all his power, Corrado was a man consumed by a singular gnawing terror, the curse of his own blood. He saw his legacy as a sacred, unbroken line, and he saw with mounting horror that his heirs were flawed. His son Alessandro possessed a brilliant mind for numbers and strategy, but his body was frail, his leg twisted from a childhood bout with polio. Corrado looked at his son's cane, the clack, clack, clack it made on the marble floors, and saw only genetic rot. He saw a lamb trying to rule a kingdom of wolves. Then there was his daughter, Serafina. She was the true heir to his mind. She was cold, calculating, and possessed a strategic brilliance that bordered on the psychic. She saw patterns in the city's chaos that no one else did, but she was a woman. In Corrado's medieval worldview, she was a vessel for an alliance, a bargaining chip to be married off, not a hand to wield the scepter. This was his blind spot, and it would prove to be his doom. One evening during a dinner held in suffocating silence, Corrado watched his children. He watched Alessandro struggle to cut his meat, his weak hand trembling. He watched Serafina stare into the fire, her mind clearly miles away, probably solving a logistical problem Corrado's capos had been wrestling with for weeks. "A twisted son and a barren daughter," he muttered, just loud enough for them to hear. "This is the legacy I am given." Alessandro flinched, his face pale. Serafina, however, didn't move. She merely tilted her head, a flicker of something cold and appraising in her eyes, before she slowly, deliberately, met her father's gaze. The Don looked away first. He knew in that moment that the poison in his house was not just in his son's leg, but in his daughter's mind. And he knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that he would have to be the one to cut it all out. If Corrado Bellucci was the fist of the family, and Serafina the hidden brain, Silas the chalk Vieri was its nervous system. Silas was not Italian. He was not a soldier. He was a quiet, almost invisible man with thin spectacles and fingers permanently stained with the white dust of chalk and the black ink of ledgers. He was a foundling, taken in by Corrado's father years ago, and his loyalty was supposedly absolute. His talent was mathematics. He could look at a column of figures and see a story. He saw the waste, the skimming, the payoffs, the exact, precise cost of every bullet fired and every politician bribed. He was the consigliere of coin, and his office in the mansion's chilly basement was a fortress of abacuses, ledgers, and chalkboards covered in equations that looked like arcane symbols. Silas saw what Serafina saw. The organization was bleeding. Corrado's paranoia was becoming strategically unsound. He was spending more on loyalty tests and internal surveillance than he was on expanding his import routes. He trusted no one, and that distrust was expensive. Silas's world was one of numbers, and the numbers were telling him the Bellucci empire was a dying star, collapsing in on itself. Serafina was known as the ghost to the household staff. She moved through the mansion without a sound, a pale figure in dark dresses. Her presence felt more as a drop in temperature than as a physical being. She and Silas shared no overt alliance. They rarely spoke outside of formal family business, but an understanding existed in their shared glances across the dinner table, in the way she would leave a pertinent newspaper clipping on his desk, or the way he would leave a ledger open to a specific page for her to accidentally see. They were the only two people in the house who understood the full, terrifying scope of Corrado's instability. The inciting incident, the pebble that starts the avalanche, came on a Tuesday. Corrado had been consulting with a strega, an old-world witch, who read omens in spilled wine and bird bones. She told him there was a snake with a loyal face in his inner circle. That same day, a shipment of Canadian whiskey was hijacked, a common enough occurrence. But the driver, a loyal capo named Benny Two Hands, was the only survivor. Corrado summoned Benny. Benny, a jovial, brutal man, walked in smiling, expecting praise for surviving. He was met by Corrado's flat, black-eyed stare. Corrado asked him one question. "Did you see a crow on the road before the ambush?" Benny, confused, said no. Corrado nodded, as if this confirmed everything. The strega had mentioned the absence of a good omen. He believed Benny had set up the ambush. He nodded to his men. They took Benny to the cellar. Silas, working on his books, heard the single muffled shot. Later, he had to adjust the ledger, marking Benny's widow for a pension. He looked at the red ink he used to balance the loss, and his hand trembled. It wasn't murder. It was bad accounting. And it was then that Serafina appeared at his doorway, a shadow against the light. "He is balancing his books with blood, Mr. Vieri," she whispered. "And the math no longer adds up." The execution of Benny Two Hands was not just a murder. It was a fissure. It cracked the very foundation of loyalty upon which the Bellucci empire was built. Benny was old school, universally respected, a man who had taken a bullet for Corrado in the 20s. His death, based on what the soldiers whispered, was bird magic, sent a tremor of profound terror through the ranks. Before, the men feared Corrado's wrath. Now they feared his madness. Loyalty was no longer a shield. This was the opening Silas and Serafina had been waiting for, a moment of instability they could exploit. But to act was to sign their own death warrant. They met days later, not in the house, but in the bone-chilling cold of the St. Michael the Archangel Cathedral during midday mass. The air was thick with incense and the drone of Latin prayer. They sat in a back pew, two mourners lost in the crowd. They didn't speak of treason. They spoke of contingencies, of preserving the family's assets. Serafina's voice was barely a whisper, lost in the echo of the organ. "My father is burning the house down to find a single rat," she said, her eyes fixed on the stained glass window. "But the fire is the problem, not the rat." Silas, his hands trembling in his coat pockets, could only nod. He knew the numbers. The cost of the lost shipment was $20,000. The cost of the disruption from Benny's death, spooked drivers, suspicious partners, and the coming war with Benny's grieving, powerful cousins would be 10 times that. "What do you propose?" Silas asked, his voice cracking. Serafina turned to him, Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. "You cannot kill a disease by shooting it. You must starve it. We don't kill him. We bankrupt him. We discredit him. We make his own men see him not as a don, but as a liability." The plan was insidious in its simplicity. They would not stage a coup. They would orchestrate a collapse. They would use Corrado's own paranoia as the weapon. Silas would subtly manipulate the ledgers, making small, untraceable errors that would look like skimming. He would misdirect shipments, not to steal them, but to make them late, to make Corrado's partners restless. Serafina, using her network of household staff and society contacts, would feed rumors. She would whisper to rival families that Corrado was weak, that he was making moves on their territory. She would whisper to Corrado's own capos that the rival families were laughing at him, that his son was weak, that his consigliere was cooking the books. They would create a hall of mirrors and let Corrado fight his own reflections until he destroyed himself. "He believes in a curse," Serafina whispered, her breath fogging in the cold. "It is only right that we give him one." The plan began not with a bang, but with a whisper. Silas's first move was a masterpiece of clerical malice. Corrado had a massive shipment of uncut scotch arriving from the Irish mob in Boston. It was a deal worth a fortune, one that Corrado had personally guaranteed. Silas, reviewing the shipping manifests in his basement office, allowed his pen to slip. He changed a single digit in the warehouse address. A 3 became an 8. The trucks were dispatched, the payment was made, and 2 days later the shipment vanished. It wasn't stolen. It was sitting in a rival family's unguarded warehouse, a gift from an anonymous source. The rival Don, Johnny Apples Galliano, was baffled, then delighted. He assumed one of Corrado's men had betrayed him, selling the shipment for pennies on the dollar. Meanwhile, Corrado was apoplectic. He summoned his most trusted and volatile capo, a man named Rico the Hammer Bastone. Rico was a bulldog, loyal to a fault, but with a temper that could level a room. Corrado, his eyes black with suspicion, demanded to know who in Rico's crew had talked. Rico, completely innocent, swore on his mother's grave that his operation was clean, but Silas had already laid the second trap. He presented a ledger to Corrado showing a discretionary fund payment to Rico's crew just 2 days before the shipment vanished. The payment was legitimate, a standard bonus, but Silas had dated it after it was paid, making it look like a secret payoff. Corrado looked at the ledger, then at Rico, and said nothing. He simply dismissed him. Rico left the office in a cold sweat, feeling for the first time in his life the icy gaze of the crow on the back of his neck. Serafina, meanwhile, moved on the other side of the board. She attended a charity ball, a rare appearance. There she accidentally let slip to the wife of a Chicago politician that her father was dreadfully worried about Johnny Apples, that Galliano was getting too ambitious. Within 48 hours, the mayor, who was on Galliano's payroll, had 3 of Corrado's speakeasies raided by the police. The message was clear: stay in your lane. Corrado, already convinced Rico was a traitor, now saw a vast conspiracy. He believed Rico was skimming, Galliano was laughing at him, and the city was turning on him. His paranoia, once a simmering coal, was now a raging inferno. He retreated to his office, refusing to eat, spending hours staring at the city lights, seeing enemies in every shadow and traitors in every friendly face. The air in the Bellucci mansion grew thick and toxic. Corrado's suspicion, fed by Silas's manipulated numbers and Serafina's surgical rumors, settled on Rico Bastone like a shroud. Corrado summoned Silas to his study, a room so dark the curtains seemed to drink the light. The Don was not raging. He was calm, which was infinitely more terrifying. He sat behind his massive desk, a single lamp illuminating the ledger Silas had prepared. "Explain this," Corrado whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the entry for Rico's bonus. Silas felt the blood drain from his face. This was the moment. His mind raced, calculating the odds, the permutations of the lie. "It is as it appears, Don Bellucci," Silas said, his voice a dry rasp. "A standard loyalty payment as you ordered." Corrado leaned in, the lamplight carving deep shadows into his face. "But the date, Mr. Vieri. The date. You are meticulous. You do not make mistakes. This payment was logged after." The trucks went missing, it looks like a reward. Silas forced himself to meet the Don's gaze. An error, Don. In the chaos of the loss, I must have misfiled the entry. Corrado stared at him for a full minute, the silence stretching until Silas could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The Don was searching for a crack, a flicker of deceit. Silas, the man of numbers, prayed his performance was believable. He had faked fear of Corrado's anger, letting a fine tremor enter his hand. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. This Corrado mistook for fear of the situation, not fear of being caught. Finally, Corrado leaned back. "See that you do not make such an error again." He dismissed Silas, but the seed was planted. Corrado was now convinced Rico was the snake. He put 2 of his personal psychopathic bodyguards, the Gallo twins, on Rico, ordering them to watch his every move. Rico, feeling the eyes on him, grew desperate. He couldn't understand the Don's coldness. He was a loyal soldier, and his honor was being questioned. He began to meet with other capos, complaining, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. This, of course, was reported back to Corrado by the Gallo twins as proof of Rico's conspiracy. Rico was no longer just a suspect. He was a condemned man. Alessandro Bellucci lived in the shadow of his father's contempt. He spent his days in the mansion's vast 2-story library, a prisoner of his twisted leg and his father's disappointment. He wasn't a gangster. He was a scholar, reading Marcus Aurelius and Machiavelli, finding in their pages the strength and cunning he lacked in his own body. He loved his father, but he feared him with a primal terror that left him stammering and weak in Corrado's presence. Serafina saw her brother not as a weakness, but as a potential casualty, another piece that would be swept off the board by their father's madness. One evening, she found him in the library, his face pale in the moonlight. "Father is not well, Ale," she said softly, standing by the window. "His judgment is clouded." Alessandro looked up from his book, his eyes wide with fear. "You must not say such things, Sarah. He is the Don. He knows what he's doing." "Does he?" she countered, her voice sharp. "Benny Two Hands is dead because of a witch's superstition. Rico Bastone is next. Father is breaking the family. You must see this." "What can we do?" Alessandro whispered, his voice trembling. "He is our father." Serafina sighed. She saw that his loyalty was just a different name for his fear. She couldn't trust him. He was too broken. "Do nothing, then," she said, her voice turning to ice. "Keep reading your books. But when he comes for you, Ale, do not say I didn't warn you." The conversation left Alessandro terrified. He wanted to prove his loyalty, to fix what was broken. He wanted to be the son his father wanted. Later that night, he went to Corrado's study. "Father," he began, his cane clacking on the floor, I heard something. Rico, he was in the garden, talking with the other capos. He was asking about the new shipments." Alessandro thought he was being helpful. He thought he was proving his vigilance. He didn't see the look in his father's eyes. Corrado saw this not as a son's report, but as the final damning piece of evidence. Rico was now actively trying to undermine him, to steal his roots. Alessandro's innocent, desperate attempt to win his father's approval had just become Rico Bastone's death warrant. "Thank you, my son," Corrado said, his voice unnervingly gentle. "You have done well. You have proven your blood is true." Alessandro beamed, leaving the room with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in his entire life. He didn't hear his father pick up the telephone as he left. The fragile peace in Chicago's underworld shattered. Serafina's rumors had taken root. Johnny Apple's Galliano, now convinced Corrado Bellucci was making a move on his territory, decided on a show of force. He didn't hit a truck, he hit a speakeasy. Galliano's men walked into the Gilded Cage, one of Corrado's most profitable clubs during peak hours. They didn't shoot. They just walked in with axes and bats and reduced the entire place to splinters and broken glass, all in under 3 minutes. It was a humiliating public message. 12 of Corrado's men were injured, and his reputation was shattered. The news reached Corrado as he was meeting with his capos. The room fell silent. This act, combined with Alessandro's warning about Rico, crystallized Corrado's paranoia into a single, diamond-hard certainty. He believed Rico had given Galliano the location, told him when security would be light, as a gesture of goodwill before switching sides. The logic was insane, but to Corrado, it was as clear as day. The curse was upon him, and it wore Rico's face. "No more," Corrado whispered, his voice shaking with a cold rage. He turned to the Gallo twins. "Bring Rico to the mansion. Use the cellar entrance. Tell him it's a private matter." Serafina, who had informants among the staff, heard the order. Her blood ran cold. This was it. The plan was accelerating beyond her control. She had wanted to bankrupt her father, not start a war. Now the organization was fracturing, and her father was responding by trying to amputate the limb he believed was infected. She tried to intercept her father, finding him in the hall. "Father, this is what Galliano wants," she pleaded, breaking her usual silence. "He's provoking you. Rico is loyal. This is a mistake." Corrado stopped. He turned and looked at his daughter, his eyes as dead and black as polished stones. He raised his hand and slapped her hard across the face. The sound echoed in the marble hall. "You will be silent," he hissed. "You are a woman. You know nothing of these things. You are fortunate I do not think you are part of this." Serafina held her cheek, a red mark blooming on her pale skin. She said nothing. She simply watched him walk away, and in her eyes the last flicker of familial duty died, replaced by something as cold and hard as the concrete floor beneath her feet. The execution of Rico Bastone was not a clean affair. It was a ritual of madness. Corrado had him brought to the vast, damp wine cellar, the same one where Benny Two Hands had met his end. Rico, a proud man, walked in confused but not yet terrified. He still believed in the old rules. He still believed in loyalty. He saw Corrado sitting on a chair in the corner, flanked by the Gallo twins. "Don Bellucci," Rico said, spreading his hands. "What is this? Galliano hit us. We should be hitting him back, not skulking in a cellar." Corrado just stared at him. "You gave him the club, Rico," he said, his voice flat. "No," Rico breathed, the color draining from his face. "Boss, on my children, You are a snake," Corrado interrupted. "My son, my own blood, he confirmed it. You conspired. You planned to take my roots." "Your son?" Rico was completely baffled. "He's a boy. What does he know?" This was the final mistake. Corrado's rage at the insult to his bloodline was absolute. "He knows loyalty," Corrado screamed, standing up. "He knows a traitor when he sees one." He ordered the Gallo twins to hold him. And then, in a fit of paranoid dementia, Corrado demanded his son Alessandro be brought down to watch. Alessandro arrived shaking, his cane clattering. "Father, no, please. Watch," Corrado commanded. "Watch how we cleanse the family of its weakness." Rico, seeing the hopeless insanity in the Don's eyes, finally understood. He lunged, not at Corrado, but at Alessandro. "You did this!" he roared. But the Gallo twins were on him. The end was brutal and pathetic. Corrado didn't use a gun. He used a hammer, the same tool in Rico's nickname. He made Alessandro watch every single blow. When it was over, the cellar was silent, save for Alessandro vomiting in the corner and Corrado's harsh, ragged breathing. The Don, covered in blood, looked at his trembling son. "This is how you rule, Alessandro. You cut out the poison." This single act was the death knell of the Bellucci organization. When word got out about how Rico died, not in a street fight, not by a rival, but butchered by his own Don, in his own basement, on the word of a witch and a cripple, the remaining capos were no longer just scared. They were finished. Loyalty was dead. The curse had been spoken aloud, and it was Corrado himself. Corrado's victory was hollow. He had purged the traitor, but in doing so, he had ripped the heart out of his own organization. The remaining capos were paralyzed by fear. No one would make a move. No one would offer advice. No one would act without a direct order. Shipments rotted on docks. Speakeasies ran out of liquor. Protection payments went uncollected because the enforcers were too afraid to leave the safe houses, terrified they'd be the next to be summoned to the cellar. The Bellucci Empire, once a titan, was now a headless giant, bleeding out from 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. Rivals, sensing the kill, began to circle. Johnny Apples Galliano, who had started the avalanche, began taking over Bellucci territories block by block, meeting almost no resistance. Corrado, isolated in his mansion, saw this as further proof of the conspiracy. He trusted no one. No one, except the two people who were methodically dismantling his world. He sat in his study for 2 days, drinking, staring at the ledgers. The numbers no longer made sense. They were a chaotic scramble of losses and red ink. And then his liquor-fogged brain cleared. He wasn't a mathematician, but he was a predator. And a predator senses a pattern. The losses, they weren't random. They were precise. They were designed. They were too clean. His eyes fell on the signature at the bottom of each page, S. Vieri. A man who never made mistakes. A man who was meticulous. A man who had looked him in the eye and lied about the date on Rico's payment. He thought back. Silas, who saw the books. Serafina, who saw everything else. The two quietest people in the house. The ghost and the chalk. The barren daughter and the loyal accountant. He realized with a sudden, sickening clarity that the snake had not been Rico. The snake was his own shadow. That evening, Silas was in his basement office, preparing a final transfer of assets to an offshore account Serafina had established. The door opened. It wasn't one of the maids. It was Corrado. He was alone. He looked disheveled, his suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't yell, he whispered, "The chalk, Mr. Vieri." Silas froze. "Don, it's on your sleeve," Corrado said, pointing. "You always have chalk on your sleeve. All those numbers. You just moved them. You and her, my flesh, my blood." Before Silas could even stand, the Gallo twins were in the room. They seized him. Corrado picked up the abacus from Silas's desk, a simple child's tool, and smashed it against the wall. "We have the rat," he said, his voice a low growl. He picked up the phone and called Serafina in her room. "My daughter," he said, his voice dripping with a terrifying false calm. "We have found the last traitor. We will cleanse the family tonight. Come to the cellar. It is time you all learned." Serafina heard the click of the phone. She knew. Silas was taken. The game was over. She was next. Serafina Bellucci stood in her room, the phone still humming in her hand. The cold, calm certainty that had guided her for months settled over her. Her father had her co-conspirator. He would be tortured. He would talk. Her name would be the last thing he said. She had perhaps an hour. She could run. Silas had prepared an escape route for her, a new identity, a bank account in Switzerland. But she knew her father. He would hunt her to the ends of the earth. He wouldn't just kill her. He would make an example of her. Running was a death sentence, just a slower one. No, the only way out was through. Her father believed he was purging the last rat. He had no idea she was the serpent. She had to accelerate the endgame. Tonight, it was time to stop being a ghost. It was time to become a queen. She went to her safe, hidden behind a heavy tapestry. But she didn't take a gun. She took out a different kind of weapon, a hidden ledger. The real ledger. The one Silas had meticulously kept, documenting every single transaction Corrado had made. Not just the official family business, but the secret accounts, the bribes to judges, and most damningly, the payments to the Strega, the witch, the proof of his madness. She also took out a list of wire transfers. Over the last month, as the empire crumbled, she and Silas hadn't just been routing money out. They had been consolidating every liquid asset Corrado had into one single account, an account only she could access. She walked out of her room, not towards the cellar, but towards the front door. She had 2 phone calls to make and a meeting to call. Corrado wanted a trial. She would give him one. But he wouldn't be the judge. He would be the accused. The cellar was cold. Silas was bound to a chair, the Gallo twins standing over him. Corrado circled him, not with a hammer, but with a ledger. "You thought you were smart," Corrado hissed, slapping Silas with the book. "You thought you could steal from me. You were destroying the family," Silas spat, his fear replaced by a sudden, defiant courage. "You were sick. We were trying to save it." "Save it?" Corrado laughed, a dry, barking sound. "By giving it to her? A woman? You would end my line?" He raised his hand to strike, but the cellar door creaked open. Corrado smiled. "Ah, Serafina, come, watch the rats squeal." But it wasn't just Serafina. Behind her stood 3 men, the 3 most powerful and most terrified capos left in the organization. Men who had lost everything in the past month. Men whose loyalty to Corrado had been murdered alongside Rico Bastone. "What is this?" Corrado snapped, his hand dropping. "Get out. This is family business. It is, Don Bellucci, said the lead capo, a man named Tartaglia. Which is why we are here. Serafina stepped forward into the dim light. She was no longer the ghost. She was immaculate, her face a mask of cold authority. Father, she said, her voice echoing in the stone room, you are relieved of your duties. Corrado stared at her, then at his capos. He laughed. You dare? With my men? They are not your men, Father, Serafina said. They are businessmen, and you are a bad investment. She tossed the real ledger onto the floor. There, the past 6 months, $500,000 spent on seances, on omens. 20% of our roots lost because you butchered your most loyal capo over a bad dream. The capos looked at the ledger, then at Corrado. They saw the truth. And tonight, Serafina continued, her voice like steel, you have nothing left. The family accounts are empty. I took it all. Corrado's face turned purple. You whore! He lunged, pulling a pistol from his waistband. But he wasn't lunging at Serafina. He was lunging at Silas, the man who had enabled her. Before he could pull the trigger, 2 shots echoed in the cellar. But they didn't come from Corrado. Tartaglia and the other capo fired simultaneously. Corrado Bellucci, the crow, staggered, looking down at his chest, his face a mask of pure disbelief. He looked up at his daughter. The curse, he whispered. Serafina walked over to him as he crumpled to the floor. She knelt, close to his ear. There was no curse, Father, she said. There was only you, and then there was me. She stood, turning to the shocked capos, her hands clean. The reign of the crow was over. The new queen's silence was more terrifying than her father's rages. Serafina Bellucci, with the family's entire fortune at her command, restored order with brutal, terrifying efficiency. She paid the capos what they were owed, quadrupled their earnings, and in a single brilliant move, brokered a truce with Johnny Apple's Galliano, sacrificing a small, worthless territory in exchange for peace. Business was, for the first time in a year, stable. But Serafina had 2 loose ends, 2 lingering problems that haunted her. The first was her brother, Alessandro. He was weak, true, but he was also the legitimate male heir. As long as he lived, he was a puppet, a figurehead that restless rivals could rally around to challenge her. He was a symbol of the old, failed bloodline. The second and more painful loose end was Silas Vieri. He was the man who had helped her win, the man who knew every secret, every account number, every single step of their treason. He was loyal to her, but he was a man of numbers, not of blood. He had seen her betray her father. He would always know her as a kinslayer. A queen cannot rule with such a witness. She could not afford the liability of his conscience or his memory. 1 week after her ascension, she summoned Tartaglia, her new loyal consigliere. She didn't give the order with rage or even sadness. She gave it like she was balancing a ledger. My father's madness created a mess, she said, staring out the window. It is time to clean the foundation. The family name must be scrubbed. Tartaglia understood. The curse of the Bellucci bloodline wasn't a supernatural force. It was a simple, brutal equation. Power demands sacrifice. And to secure her throne, Serafina had to be more ruthless than the man she had overthrown. She had to erase the past. All of it. Alessandro was taken from the library in the middle of the night. Silas was taken from his office. They were brought to the cellar, the site of the family's beginning and its end. We are back in December 1933. The demolition crew stands frozen, staring at the concrete monolith, at the 3 figures trapped within. The police are called. The city is horrified. The papers call it the concrete portrait, a final barbaric act of rival gangsters. The official story, the one Serafina Bellucci had carefully crafted, was that Johnny Apple's Galliano, in a final act of war, had stormed the mansion, slaughtered the family, and buried them in their own cellar as a warning. The Bellucci family was declared extinct. The curse, the papers said, had finally run its course, but the curse was just a name for the conclusion. Serafina, the last of the bloodline, had erased her own family. She changed her name, moved to the East Coast, and, using the vast fortune she had secured, became a legitimate financier. She lived to be an old woman, a quiet, ruthless puppet master of Wall Street, her origins a complete secret. The Bellucci empire was gone, its name a whisper in the Chicago wind. The truth was buried, set in stone until 1998. When the old city records building was being digitized, a clerk found a misplaced box of receipts from the 1930s. In it was a carbon copy of a work order from a Chicago cement company dated November 1932. It was for a delivery of 3 tons of quickset concrete to the Bellucci mansion, to a side cellar entrance. The payment was logged in cash, but at the bottom of the order, where a signature was required, there was only a single, elegant and chilling initial, S8. The curse of the Bellucci family wasn't that they were doomed to be killed, it was that they were doomed to be the killers. The poison wasn't in their blood, it was in their ambition. And in the end, the only one who truly understood the family business was the one they never saw coming.